it's weird how there's this, you get this idea that some folks will say, on the right even, liberalism or libertarianism is the failure of our culture. This idea of individual rights or individualism and autonomous individuals. And I think to myself, wait a second, libertarians don't have any power. That's not their fault. But what they are getting at is there's this weird relationship between a culture's individualism and the rise of tyranny. It's this weird thing how it works together. If you have this individualist mindset, somehow we get more and more collectivist and more expansive in our government, right?
It's beautiful. Well, I think it goes like this. I think it's really a 2 or 3 step process. You feel a wrongness in the world,
right?
And it's a felt sense, right? First and foremost, it's a felt sense. Second, you can't fix it. You yourself, and by you I mean yourself and the relationships that you can count on, don't seem to be able to solve the problem. Now what do you do? And typically what we do is we escape. One place you can get to is you can deny the problem. You can make up a story that points the blame at something and renders you virtuous. And those are the 2 moves, right? The first move is you find something which is vice, you point the blame at something. And the second thing is you render yourself virtuous. Some folks escape into libertarianism. And they point the blame at authoritarianism or at collectivism, anything that ends in ism, and renders themselves virtuous, the autonomous, individual. Some folks escape into social justice. They point the blame at fill in the blank and always render themselves virtuous. But that's the third move, right? The first move is there is a felt wrongness. Second move is you feel powerless. Right. The third move is you escape. Now the problem is if you're sitting in that third move and you're trying to figure out how to solve things from the third position, you're going to reinforce the second position because the third position can't solve anything. Right. It only makes things worse. And the worst part is it makes things worse in a way that actually creates simple categories for other people to start dividing and conquering. Oh, I'm a libertarian, and the social justice folks are clearly collectivists. So it's not just collectivists in principle, it's collectivists in practice. And by the way, they don't like me. They yell at me a lot. They point the finger. They seem really mean and angry, and sometimes they even punch me. So now I've got a reality that's the fourth move. There's a reality that is in fact really real, which increases the reality of the wrongness, but it's actually tied to the third, which was never real in the first place, which is tied to the second, which is real, and all the way to the first. Right? So you get real lost and you get confused. And this is what's going on right now. You can see it like surging through social media. If you just sort of step back and watch social media with that lens, you keep seeing people who are fundamentally powerless, fundamentally feel powerless. So they keep making up stories to try to feel somewhat agentic. And then they mistake their stories for reality and become actually powerless.
So it's this, again, it goes back to when you're in a stagnant universe, at least you feel that way, and you can't grow the pie. The only thing you have to do is to turn to your neighbor and say, well, it's the choices you've made. It's your race, it's your gender, it's your ideology, which is causing the suffering in the world. You need to be quarantined with all guilt quarantined onto you. You need to quarantine all guilt onto you and cut it off. That's the scapegoat mechanism. It's still trying to happen.
That's nice.
Put
it in other places, right? You could put it into the stone on the ground.
Right.
I think everybody's had that experience as a child, is stubbing your toe on a stone and blaming the stone. And first and foremost, think about it. That's a very nice, simple example. I don't have to be too highfalutin.
Right.
I'm walking along and I stub my toe on a stone. What happens? Well, I feel pain, and the consequence, the cause, is in the past. Can't change it. I'm in fact actually powerless. So I feel uncomfortable and I'm actually powerless. So now I have a choice. What do I do? Well, the energy of pain is an energy of change. I want to change what happened, but I can't because it's in the past. So one of the things I might do is I might blame something. I could blame myself. Well, that's uncomfortable. I could also blame the stone.
It's funny you mentioned
you kick the stone.
That's the metaphor for the gospel transformation in the Bible, scandalon, the stumbling block that you stumble onto in the field. And that's the scandal that causes either mimetic rivalry, because when Peter confronts Jesus and he says, you're not going to die on the cross. We're the 99. We're going to go beat the 1%. Okay. It's time to have the revolution, Jesus. You've got a movement here. Your poll numbers are good. Let's storm the castle. And Jesus says, get behind me, Satan, which means get behind me, accuser. You are a stumbling block to me. So you're a stone that I've stubbed my toe on. You're trying to draw me into doing things the way of that scarcity mindset.
That's right. That's right. That's a real, I mean, it's the silliest thing to say. That's a real insight. Yeah. It's a real insight. I think it's crucial to land though, right? Because it's too easy. You can't help it, right? You kick the stone. There's a whole lot of instinct that says, well, maybe what I should do is kick. You stumble on the stone. Maybe I should just kick the stone. Maybe the stone got in the way. And it's even harder because you have to realize that the first thing you have to do is you have to recognize that the pain probably pulled you out of your connection to the sacred. Right. And you've been pulled back into the profane. And if you can build a capacity, now we're very simple again. I stubbed my toe. My toe hurts. A capacity to actually first and foremost recognize what it feels like to be pulled into the profane and to slow down, take a breath. Look at your toe. Is it pain or is it harm? If it's harm, is it harm or is it real damage? Do I actually deal with something? If I do, let's deal with something. If it's just pain, are there any things that I could have done better that I can use to change my capacity to move forward in the world? If no, then it's in the past. It is simply a part of reality that happens to occur. If yes, then let's grow in that direction, as challenging as that may be, which having a 2-year-old at home, you see that 2-year-olds don't really have too much of a trouble with it. They stumble and fall. They cry because that's what happens. They allow the crying to pass through them without getting too hung up on blaming anybody. Then they figure out how to get better. And you just be like unto the child and learn how to learn from your mistakes without blaming anybody. It's probably a pretty good ancillary to that particular rule.
Yeah, the kingdom of God is like children. That's what it's about. Yeah, that's the idea. To have that childlike lack of desire to scapegoat and tear down something else. I think that's a picture of what we're trying to describe.
Yeah, and it's funny because, and I want to name it, we're having a conversation which has a feeling a bit, it's not theoretical, but it's living in the domain of language. And yet, I'm sitting in my chair using a computer to talk to you over telecommunications infrastructure, and you're at a makeshift version of a booth because we're quarantined.
Right.
Voluntary quarantine, at least on my part. I suppose in some sense it's always voluntary, and that's important to recognize.
Right.
But things are afoot. Right? Normality is definitely not going on outside. Right. I think was it yesterday where the Pentagon had that whole aliens thing, and everybody looks at it and goes, it's going to take a lot more than aliens to weird us out these days. So I'd like to invite people to accept the reality of the signs, right? The reality that you can actually look around and go, oh, this is that thing. This is the telling us that we're right now in the process of making a real big choice of whether we spiral down into the inevitable spiral of mimetic desire, into conflict, into chaos, into terror, or we take this stumbling block and we stumble up and we acknowledge, oh, that's right. I have to remember the difference between the sacred and the profane. And I have to return back to the path before I do anything else. And how do I proceed forward in this space more deeply in the sacred than I was before? And find all those who would be friends, in the Quaker sense. Right? The society of friends, the society of those who agree to support each other in maintaining their individual and collective integrity in the shared space of peace and grace in the sacred. And then build from there, right? Because that group of people, a group of people who enter into an agreement around that kind of a shared directionality is the only possible way out of this mess.
Right.
We're not going to get there by pointing fingers, and we're not going to get there by having a boss tell us what to do. I don't know if you've noticed, they're not very good at it. And we're not going to get there by blaming the boss either. It doesn't make anything any better.
That's the revolutionary counter spirit that imitates the spirit of the state itself. Yeah. Both of them are the same thing, and they both lead to destruction. Revolutionary overthrow and the imposition of the old order. They're identical twins.